So are you a baker in search of the perfect gift for your Valentine? Well, they say nothing's better than a gift straight from the heart, so how about we actually make some hearts and see if that works? That's what we'll be trying today anyway, is shaping our sourdough boules into heart-shaped loaves. To do this, we'll start with a small square of baking paper, and we start to sketch out the heart. Now you only have to do half of the heart, because we'll then fold it in half so that we have a perfectly symmetrical heart at the end. Now the size of this should be about 3/4 of the top of your boule, but we'll see as the video goes through exactly what that looks like on a standard size boule. So there we go, we have our stencil ready to go. We'll then go ahead and take our boule out of the freezer because it's been there for 10 to 20 minutes just to firm up. Now it's covered in a 50-50 flour and rice flour mixture in my case, so we go ahead and wipe that off, but we also want to brush it down. And what I'm using here is a Blister Glaze crust, which is from Teresa at the Baking Network, and it's just a mixture of a bit of corn flour with some water. Now because we've used rice flour in the bannetons, we need to be careful that we get all of that rice that we're wiping down and blot it off. If we don't, then it has sort of an opaque color when we finally bake it. So we're not wiping too hard, we're just blotting it, and we have a nice surface right at the top where we can then stick our stencil onto. So we'll leave it there, and that will serve as a nice guide for where we want to actually do our chops. Now, I'm using a metal bench scraper here. You could use a knife if you want, you could use just about anything, but I've found that a nice metal bench scraper, sometimes with a little bit of either water or a bit of oil, if it's sticking, seems to work the best. So what we're doing here is a combination of making cuts and then folding it under. You'll notice when I'm making the cuts, I'm doing it at a bit of an angle because I want to preserve as much skin of the loaf as possible, so then I can tuck it under and have a nice crust. Anywhere that we don't tuck under is going to have much less of a skin and therefore a bit of a different crust than the rest of the loaf, so just be aware. So we see we go in at an angle here. It fights us a little bit, but we go ahead and get those chunks off. And don't forget to save those chunks because they make for wonderful mini baguettes in that case for these longer pieces. So we see our heart shape starting to take form here. Now it's much better to do less than more at this point because you can always cut a bit more off, but you don't want to try and put dough back on. It never works quite right. So you see here, as I'm going around, I'm tucking it under, and that allows you to sort of provide more of a curve to it, but it also provides a bit more strength in the dough for when it bakes so that it goes ahead and puffs up instead of spreads out where you've done these chops. So in that top part, you'll notice that after I cut, I sort of push out to the left and to the right, and then I tuck under. Now you'll see it's getting sticky at some of these parts. I could have re-watered it or put a bit of oil here, that probably would have helped, but I wasn't smart enough when I did this. You'll notice there that there's a little bit of an asymmetric side there, so I go ahead and I chop a bit more off. You can keep doing this until you get to the point that you have the heart shape that you'd like. Now once we're done with that, we go ahead and put a 50-50 mix of rice flour and all-purpose flour all over that stencil of the heart on the top. Now we carefully peel it off, and we should be left with a perfect heart shape that will turn a nice sourdough brown at the end. Now you just want to very carefully score, and you want to do it inside of the lines because you don't want to have the white rice flour line left over on the baked loaf. So try and do that just inside your stencil. And you want to do this decently deep because this is serving as both the artistic and the expansion score. If you have a loaf that is underproofed or just has a lot of spring to it, if you don't make this deep enough, then it'll simply burst out from wherever it needs to in the loaf. But in this case, it can puff up and that heart can actually push out if it needs a little more expansion. Now the final bit is I'm taking that same mixture as before, which is some corn flour, cornstarch mixed with water, and I'm brushing it on the top. And I found on long ferments, this actually works really nicely to pull out the blisters. So I've got my combo cooker or Dutch oven there waiting for me. I leave the top out actually while I'm scoring it just to cool it down a bit to make sure that I don't get any burnt bottoms. But the other side of the Dutch oven has been sitting in the oven, so I go ahead and pull that out, pop it on very carefully and pop it in the oven, and all we have to do is wait to see how it turns out. So here we see some beautiful blisters from that Blister glaze crust with those nice expansion scores there, which sort of outlines our heart. And then the rice flour and all-purpose flour combination allows that nice little white-ish look to it. So if you like this video, please do subscribe and like, and even leave a comment if you can. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and be sure to visit me on Instagram and Twitter for more content. Thank you so much for stopping by.